Good morning. This is Dr. David A. Padgett. This is World Regional Geography 1010, Section 98B. Today is March 24, 2021. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get right into the today's activities. First, I'm going to start off with some basic housekeeping. Just a reminder that Article Review 5 is due next Monday, but more importantly, the Unit B research quiz is due this Friday. So I've talked about the format for the quiz at length. And so you will just simply download the quiz and the answer sheet in similar fashion to the first quiz and answer the questions. I have provided a recording that includes exactly what I expect in terms of the detail of your answers, your explanation, and your references. So please pay attention to that. Make sure that you answer the questions completely and thoroughly. If you have any questions about the quiz this week, please make sure that you contact me and get the answer to those questions so that you can do your best job on the quiz. So I think that is, and then the last piece of housekeeping is, again, I have completed the midterm grades, the letter grades. If you are unsure of what your midterm grade is, just email me or contact me. I will let you know what it is. If you are unsure of how to access that information yourself through my TSU, I have record of your midterm grades. Just ask and I'll let you know what those grades happen to be at the time. Again, in terms of your midterm grades, continue to keep up the good work in order to maintain your position, your status. Continue to work as hard as you work during the first half of the semester for the second half of the semester. Don't, let's say if you have a B in the class, assume that you can let up and still maintain that grade. Continue to work hard. What you should be doing is, if you have a B, push towards an A. If you have a C, push towards a B. And if you have a grade other than A, B, or C, you should be trying to get yourself out of that situation by working as hard as possible. Okay, so today I'm going to pick it up where we left off on Monday. Our focus is upon the population geography of Latin America. And I'll go to student view for now. So now I'm in student view. Here's the population geography of Latin America. So just as a quick review, we discussed several ways that we measure population that are discussed on pages 43 through 50. And so we looked at the gross birth rate, gross death rate. We've discussed doubling time. We spent a lot of time on fertility rates. And so there are many ways that we look at population. We'll go back and look at population structure a little bit today. That is using the population pyramids or age sex diagrams. As you listen to this recording, I would strongly advise that you have your book open to chapter 11, pages 287 to 296, and take notes referencing whatever pertinent vocabulary words are brought forth today and during this lecture, and of course, during Monday's lecture. So I'm going to start off by with this cartogram. So again, a cartogram is a map that uses shapes to convey a message to the map reader. And so here we have a cartogram of the relative sizes of cities in South America in this case. And as you can see, some of these cities are approaching and going over 20 million people. So when we left off last time, our emphasis was upon the urban geography of Latin America and the Caribbean. And the reason why we are using this as a point of emphasis is, of course, because, as I mentioned during the last lecture, as I was presenting this PowerPoint, which I will cue up again, one of the things that has become of concern in recent years on a global scale is the fact that the world's population has become predominantly, just barely, but is predominantly urban. And so this issue of cities and population growth is an urban area of concern. We have more people living in cities now worldwide than are living in rural areas. And this is a first. This is a very recent change in human population distribution throughout the world. The problem is that in many of these urban areas, and some of these larger urban areas are found in parts of Latin America, the areas of cities that are growing the fastest are the slums, the unplanned settlements, the favelas, the shanty towns, where people are moving into cities and finding that there is no water, there is no sanitation, there is no housing, there is no electricity. All of the amenities that we would assume to have here in the United States if we were to move to a city. So if you were to graduate, well, not if, when you graduate from Tennessee State University, you might move to Atlanta or Dallas or San Francisco or Albuquerque, New Mexico. Who knows where you might wind up. When you move to one of those cities, you will assume that they will have housing, electricity, water supply, sanitation. You know, these are things that you expect to have when you move to a city, which in most cases, or pretty much all cases in the United States, is true. But in other parts of the world, when people move from a rural area to an urban area, they find themselves living without those amenities. And as you can see in this article, 1 billion people, 1 out of every 6 people on this planet lives in a slum or a place that doesn't have amenities that are almost necessary for survival in today's world, or at least healthy living at a minimum. And so we see in this article that about 1.6 million people die every year due to some of these health issues that are associated with living in growing urban areas. And so this phenomenon is called over-urbanization. So over-urbanization is when the human population in a city exceeds the capacity of a city to support the human population. Too many people, not enough water. Too many people, not enough housing. Too many people, not enough sanitation infrastructure. Too many people, not enough electricity. These are the issues that are associated with over urbanization. That's what that means. And you can clearly see that there are a number of problems related to over urbanization, including those that ultimately will result in loss of life. Um, Here is a pretty nice favela. So favela is the word for slum in Latin America. And as you can see, the housing is not really what we would consider stable, built up on these slopes. And so remember, the poor, less wealthy people live up in the hills in Latin America. And sometimes these people become victims to landslides and mudslides when there is rain or tropical storms. And so we have that as an additional hazard to being poor in these parts of the world. Here is now this is obviously not in Latin America, but this is a shanty town in Africa. And as you can see, not that there aren't places like this in Latin America where people are literally living. If we were to see homeless, well, if we were to see people living like this in our country, we would say that they were homeless. And you might think, oh, there's nobody living like this in Nashville, but certainly there are people living like that in Nashville. And I'm going to come back to that later on. This is where we left off last time, taking a really hard look at what people have to do to get clean water in cities in Latin America, such as Mexico City. And so here it says, after waiting for more than 5 hours at a water distribution center to get delivery of her weekly ration of water, let's pause right there. So this woman had to wait 5 hours to get her weekly ration of water. Now, we have a situation like this in the United States, in Flint, Michigan, if you remember, but the water crisis in Flint, Michigan is just that. It's a crisis. It's very unusual for this country to see people without access to clean drinking water. The option being drinking poisoned water or unclean water. That's a very unusual situation. And that's why it was such a large part of the news stream for so long. Because it's unusual. But in other parts of the world, that's normality. This situation here in Mexico City isn't some crisis situation or unusual. This waiting in line for water for hours or walking for miles to get clean water on every day is a normal way of life for many, many people, at least 1 billion people on this earth. And I'd probably say 2 billion people. Whereas we get up in the morning and just turn the tap. This is what we do, get water. And pretty much we don't even think about it. It's there every day. We don't even think about it. You know, sometimes we think about it if the pressure isn't high enough and it doesn't come out of the tap fast enough. Now we have a problem. Or maybe it's not quite hot enough. Then we have a problem. Not the fact that we actually have water, but it's not coming out of the spigot fast enough. It's not hot enough for us. So we have a problem in this country. You know, we'll whine about that. Where people in other parts of the world just wish they had water hot, cold, fast, slow, period. And so this is the situation that many people find themselves in. It says Raquel Villanueva, 31, prepares to wash her dishes at her home in Mexico City. Many of the city's 20 million people get by on as little as 1 hour of running water per week. And understand that when we start to look at the economics of scale here, we might think, oh, well, Mexico is a poor country. No, not really. In the textbook, you'll see where the nations are broken down in terms of their wealth, in terms of their GNIP per person. Mexico is in the second quintile. So if we divided all the countries in the world in terms of their wealth into 5 parts, Mexico would be in the second highest. Of course, the United States, Japan, Great Britain, all those countries would be at the top. Mexico would be at the second rank, not at the bottom, not at the bottom with places like Chad and Afghanistan, but at the second rung on that scale. So imagine if this is what life is like in the upper middle class countries of the world. What is life like for places like the Congo or in Afghanistan, those countries that are on the bottom rung of that ladder? Kind of puts things into perspective in terms of where we are on this planet in terms of resources. So we should consider ourselves very lucky, fortunate, blessed, whatever you want to say. Because this is not reality for us, at least not right now. Now, it's reality for people in Flint, Michigan, but that's very unusual. Extremely unusual. So during the last unit, during Unit B, when we were talking about North America, we looked at urban land use dynamics. And so remember, we looked at the way that cities form in North America, and you learned that the primary or the predominant city structure or the predominant city model is the concentric ring model shown here in this figure at A. So we had zone 1, which is a central business district or downtown, mostly commercial land use. And then we had zones, let's go to zones 2, 3, and 4, which are the residential zones, where as the farther we move away from downtown, the wealthier or the higher income residential areas we tend to see. So if we're in Nashville, if we're close to downtown, we have all the public housing in close proximity to downtown and in and around where Tennessee State University is and where Fisk is and so on and so forth. That's that zone 3, low income housing. Tennessee State University, Meharry, and Fisk are right in the middle of that. As we go farther out, we get to middle class places such as Antioch and Madison. And when we go even farther out, then we get to higher income places such as Belmead and Brentwood and Mount Juliet and so on and so forth. So the reason that our cities in our country are able to have this kind of extended landscape is because of the presence of the automobile or the predominance of the automobile in our culture. There are more cars in the United States of America than there are licensed drivers. We have more cars in this country than people who are licensed to drive them. In places such as Brazil or Costa Rica or Mexico, maybe only 1 in 10 persons has an automobile. Okay, so it's a completely different scenario in terms of automobile ownership and also the infrastructure that is available to support automobile travel, i.e. roads and streets, i.e. paved roads and streets. Not paved roads and streets are not necessarily common in some parts of the world. In fact, when people from other parts of the world come to the United States, one of the things that they are amazed about is that we can drive just about everywhere in this country. There's a paved road to just about everywhere in this country. And there are some places where you'll get on a dirt road, but But by and large, especially in an urban area, there's plenty of streets and roads. We can drive just about anywhere, even in some of the so-called rural suburban areas. So they still have paved roads. But that's not true in places like Latin America. So Latin America, if you look at this diagram, Latin American cities follow the sector model by and large. Cities divided into sectors because people have to be in close proximity to commercial and public and other land uses besides residential because they can't just drive everywhere. They don't have interstate highways like 285 in Atlanta or 610 in Houston or the Kennedy Expressway in Chicago. They don't have that kind of highway infrastructure that allows for commuting from the suburbs to the inner city. So you have a different urban model that develops. And so here is a generalized model of Latin American city structure. Now, the Latin American cities do have commercial business districts, CBDs, and notice that in this diagram, there's a spine and that spine is usually like a grand boulevard, like a grand road, say like Broadway in New York City, or say like maybe Broadway in Nashville. This grand boulevard that has all of these shops and commercial land uses and public land uses and government offices off of it or inside of it. But if you notice, the wealthiest of the wealthy in a Latin American city live in very close proximity to the CBD. Now, this is not a result of gentrification. These wealthy people have always lived in close proximity to the commercial district because even in these very wealthy countries, people just don't have cars the way that we do. They still have to live in close proximity to where they work or own businesses or do business or engage in government activities or what have you. So you see this light green area here, which represents the elite residential sector. So the wealthy people, and this is not a large part of the population, for your information, but they live very close to the downtown, the central business district. We do have gentrification happening in our country, where we see wealthy people moving closer to downtown. But by and large, for the most part, most wealthy people still live out away from downtown. There are those few that have moved to the downtown area, but that's not the majority of folks who happen to be wealthy. Notice this pink area, this zone of peripheral squatter settlements. That's a perfect example. Zone of peripheral. They're on the periphery. Squatter settlements. In other words, unplanned communities, people living perhaps in favelas are living like this or living like this on the periphery of these cities. And so you might ask yourself, well, maybe there's only a few people living like that. Maybe 5% of the population is living in favelas or living in these unplanned settlements, living in these unhealthy urban environments. Maybe not that many people living like that. If you thought that, you would be absolutely wrong. Because in Latin America and the Caribbean, and many places in the world, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the population of one of these large cities might be living in a favela. Now, in the average city in this country, maybe only about 1% of the population is unhoused or homeless, which is unacceptable regardless, even if it is 1%. In a country as rich as ours, we should not have anybody living outside, but we do. In other parts of the world, that number is 25 to 33%. So if we take the low end number, if we take the low end figure for, let's say, Mexico City or Sao Paulo, Brazil, 20 million people, 1/4 of 20 million is 5 million. 5 million people, if you can imagine living in a favela or a slum. 5 million people without drinking water, sanitation, electricity, in some cases, housing. 5 million people. And there are about 5 million people in Atlanta and the surrounding metropolitan area. There's about 5 million people in Atlanta and the surrounding metropolitan area. It's 5 million would include, of course, the city of Atlanta, Cobb County, Gwinnett County, so on and so forth. 5 million people. Imagine if all of those people were homeless. Tyler Perry, homeless. All the Atlanta Hawks players, homeless. Rick Ross, homeless. Usher, homeless. All the Atlanta Housewives, homeless. Keisha Bottoms, homeless. Just think about that. If everybody in Atlanta happened to be homeless, 5 million people, that's how many homeless people. Well, that's how many unhoused people living in favelas are in places like Rio de Janeiro or Mexico City or Sao Paulo. And you can see the enormity of that problem. And the problem is growing. That sector, the favelas and the slums, that's the sector of the cities that's growing the fastest as rural to urban migration continues. And so you have, again, those people living on the periphery of these cities out here in the hills. Now, you've heard about the very poor sector of the population. You've heard about the very wealthy sector of the population. You might ask yourself, well, is there a middle class? Well, yes, of course there is. It is not as large as the so-called middle class in the United States, which is most people here. But middle class in the United States might be, family of 4 with make $60,000 per year household income, 2,500 square foot house, 2 cars. I mean, that's middle class here. Maybe they go to Disney World every other year, take the kids to Disney World every other year for the big vacation. That's middle class. Maybe eat out to dinner maybe once a month, go out to Red Lobster for somebody's birthday once a month. That's middle class in this country, okay? In Latin America, middle class might be a couple, maybe the husband works for the government, they have 8 or 9 children, and they live in a 600 square foot, 1 or 2 bedroom home. That's middle class. We wouldn't call that middle class here. If some of you all might be living in a 600 square foot, 1 bedroom apartment right now, or you're in a 600 or 700 square foot campus apartment right now. Imagine living in there with 10 other people. You don't even like living in there with the 1 or 2 roommates that you have. Imagine living in there with 10 other people. That's common. And that if there was a family found to be living in a 600 square foot apartment with 11 people, they'd be on the news somewhere. Child Protective Services would be on the way over there, right? We wouldn't see that as middle class. We would see that as a problem. But in other parts of the world, that's middle class. I know people that grew up like that, and they're fine. They're not crazy, have issues. They're fine. They don't see any problem with it. You just become very close to your relatives, right? Now, there is a downside to that. There is a downside to living with those kind of living conditions. If we look at, say, for instance, Brazil. Brazil is becoming uh, one of the worst places on earth for COVID-19, in part due to the fact that we have that kind of multi-family housing, very dense population density, and people living in very close proximity to one another inside these favelas, inside these structures, easy transmission of COVID-19. Very much more difficult to get a handle on the issue um, in places like Brazil or other parts of Latin America that have this kind of housing structure or housing infrastructure. So there is a definite downside when it comes to COVID in terms of this kind of urban development. But while I'm on the topic of life and death and health, I'm going to segue into another issue that is important for us to look at in terms of population structure. And so I'm going to go to reference the CIA World Factbook. I got to fix this link, but it's easy fix. Just Google CIA World Factbook. We'll go right to it. Once you get there, countries, and let's go to Brazil. And let's look at go to Brazil, go to people in society, and we'll go to the Brazilian population pyramid. And we will compare that to the population pyramid of the United States. Okay, so here's the Brazilian population pyramid. Here's the United States population pyramid. So notice the US population pyramid, lots of people here in these older age cohorts. With the Brazilian population pyramid, not so much, with a lot more younger people as compared to the United States as a percentage of the population. So this Brazil's age sex diagram does have much more of a pyramid shape, so to speak. And so we can make note of the fact that, yes, there are less people in the older age cohorts here, which may be indicative of certain health concerns. But specifically, the variable that we're looking at herein is life expectancy. So the assumption is that if we look at this pyramid for the United States versus the pyramid for Brazil, the assumption might be that the life expectancy in these countries might be different. And so let's go to our table here, and we see that for the United States, life expectancy on average is 79 years of age. Let's see if we can find that same number for Brazil. It's about 76. So we do have a slightly higher life expectancy than Brazil. But if you look by and large across the board, United States of America, 79 years of age, 79 years of age life expectancy. And so let's juxtapose that with our wealth, about $63,780 per person per year for the United States, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But if we look just across our northern border to Canada, Canada is not quite as wealthy as we are, but they have a higher life expectancy by 3 years. They have the same amount higher life expectancy gap that we do with Brazil, even though there's only about a $14,000 difference in wealth. Um, so you would expect for Brazil, let's go back and look at Brazil's GNI PPP per capita. It's only $14,000 per person. And yet there's only a 3-year difference in life expectancy. Let's look at some other countries. Chile and French Guiana, which have nowhere near our wealth, have higher life expectancy. If we look at Costa Rica, Costa Rica also has higher life expectancy than we do, and they only have an $18,000 per person GNI PPP per capita figure. So we have to look at Cuba. Cuba has an equivalent. And I think their GNI PPP per person, according to the CIA World Factbook, is about 12,000, 1/5 of our wealth, and yet an equal life expectancy. So, this fact raises a lot of questions. Shouldn't we be living much longer than these people in these other countries? With all this money that we have, all this infrastructure that we have, all these hospitals, all this medicine we have at our disposal, shouldn't we be living longer than these people in other countries? Shouldn't that number be 89, 85 at least? There's a lot of questions that are raised. Is money really the answer to longer life? We have to ask. That raises a lot of questions about. It's not how much money you have. It's not how much money a country has. It's what does the country do with this money. And we're going to talk about that in more detail next week. But I just wanted to point that out. We were looking at this final way of measuring population, and that's life expectancy. That number it's interesting. Let's look at another number. Here's the United States of America. Let's look at infant mortality. So infant mortality for the United States is about 5.7 births, babies per 1,000 die before they reach 1 year of age. Let's compare that to, say, Cuba. Cuba's is lower. Cuba has a lower infant mortality rate than the United States, and yet only 1/5 of our wealth. A lot of questions have to be asked here. I don't have any answers, but a lot of questions are raised. How can we have this much more, considerably, substantially more wealth than some of these countries that, in terms of some of the health variables, are either the same or they do better? Costa Rica is 8.3. Now we're lower than Costa Rica, but 8.3. And again, they only have about 1/3 of our wealth. Anyway, just something to think about. And that's why we study population. That's why we do this. We don't study these issues just so we can get a good score on a test. That's not what this is about. This is about hoping that those of you who attend college and universities, those of you who will, in a very short amount of time, will be in charge as people my age retire and die, and you all are left here with these problems. Can you solve them? That's why we can give you the information. Can you solve the problem? Can you apply the information that you have acquired at this institution to solve the world's problems? That's the whole reason for being in college. Not so you can get a job and buy yourself a car and move out to the suburbs. That's not what education is about. So don't look at these issues in the world and these questions as something that just, let me make sure I can get the answer right on the test next week. No, the test is going to come after you graduate. That's when you will be tested. Not right now. This is just something that you go through so that we make sure that you are equipped to keep this thing going, because we're not going to be around here much longer. You are. We pass this baton, don't drop it. Well, hope not. Look at these problems that we're facing. And here's these problems about water and climate change, and all these huge problems that the world is facing are not going away. Now we have COVID-19 on top of everything else. Some of us dropped the ball with COVID-19 last year. Thought it was going to go away. Thought it was a hoax. Thought, oh, it's just like the flu. And now look, United States, wealthiest country. We only had 3% of the population on Earth, right? But overwhelmingly the most COVID-19 deaths. We're 200,000 deaths ahead of Brazil. That makes no sense. So all our money, now we're fortunate that we can put a Band-Aid on it with this vaccine. Too late for about 500,000 people. They gone. They're not coming back. We dropped the ball. We dropped the baton. And it's not like we can say, oops, our bad, and bring 500,000 people back here. They're not coming back here. They're gone. So, and it was a mistake. Nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong making a mistake as long as you learn from it. When the next pandemic comes along, and there will be another COVID-22, COVID-24, there will be more. This wasn't the first. It's not going to be the last. Are we going to do the same nonsense we did last year? Pretend it's not going to happen? Pretend it's just the flu, just like the flu is going to go away by Easter? That's what people were talking about last year. Oh, by Easter, the churches will be full of people by Easter. No, the funeral homes are full. Funeral homes are full by Easter. Anyway, but that's why we study these issues. It's not about a grade. It's about life and death, success and failure. Anyway, that's why geography is such an amazing field, because it encompasses so much. Makes us look at ourselves and ask questions. One of the first people that asked a question was Michael Jackson. Now, I know you all have heard of Michael Jackson. That was a long time ago, Dr. Padgett. I don't want to hear about Michael Jackson. Who is Michael Jackson? But Michael Jackson recorded this video. Play it for yourselves, because when I have tried to play it in previous classes, supposedly they couldn't hear it. But this video is called "They Don't Care About Us." And so you can read the story about the video. Play the video. It's a good song. It's Michael Jackson. But this video was directed by Spike Lee, and the objective of the video was to call attention to all the issues that I've been talking about in terms of urban growth in favelas in Latin America, and all the problems and the disparity. And one thing that's very different about our country compared to others is we really do live in the land of opportunity. I mean, if you work hard, if things go your way, if you have a little bit of luck, you can literally go from rags to riches. We have people like Tyler Perry, who's homeless and is now a billionaire. We have Oprah Winfrey, who graduated from Tennessee State University, who literally was dirt poor in Mississippi, where she was born. And now she's one of, I think she's the only Black female billionaire in this country that I know of. Literally came from nothing. I mean, who else? Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, Jay-Z, another billionaire. They came from nothing, worked hard, used their talent, and are now very successful. I'm not really talking about success in terms of money, success in terms of influence, success in terms of being able to help other people. It's one thing to do for you. What are you going to do for somebody else when you make it? Right. So there are lots of stories. This country, we still have those opportunities. It's very unique. In other parts of the world, so say for instance, if you were born in a favela in some parts of this world, you're not getting out of the favela. In most cases, there's no escape. There's no rags to riches. There's no we started from the bottom, now we're here. It's not happening. There's a very rigid class system in other parts of the world that it's tough here. But we have numerous stories. I just mentioned 3 of them, numerous stories of people who came from nothing and rose to prominence. So because of the somewhat oppressive classes structure in some parts of the world, including Latin America, it's not really about race in a lot of cases. It's more about class that divides people. And then there's a whole colorism issue that we'll get into later. But Michael Jackson called attention to this fact that there are people who are literally, Michael Jackson and Spike Lee called attention to the fact that there are people living in these favelas in Latin America who are trapped. And so this was 1996 when people weren't thinking about favelas. The 1990s, that was the most prosperous period in U.S. history to date. People weren't thinking about favelas, poor people living in slums, children getting shot in the streets. People weren't thinking about that in the 1990s. No. Well, Michael Jackson was thinking about it. He made this video, he and Spike Lee. And it started a conversation. And so you can please read, the story behind the video. It was filmed in a favela in Rio de Janeiro. And you can see up close and personal some of the conditions in the favela, and you can read some of what went into the making of this video. So this is why we study these issues, not for the next test, not so you can go on to Geography 1020 from 1010. I would hope that you take urban geography. So in urban geography, we explore these issues even more. It's Geography 4850, 4850. And it will be virtual during Maymester. So you don't even have to leave wherever it is you are. You can take my urban geography class and we'll explore these issues in greater detail during Maymester in my urban geography class, Geography 4850. If you are looking for an upper division elective, Geography 4850 during Maymester 2021, taught by Dr. David A. Padgett. Okay, so I think that we have covered everything there is to cover today. And so I'm going to end the recording. If you've been watching this recording, again, please ask questions about this week's quiz. Now, this week's quiz, remember, well, you'll see it. It focuses upon the human geography of North America. We spent 2 weeks on that. So please take care of that. And this material will be covered on a quiz at a later date. Quiz will be presumably next week, perhaps, or the week after. Thank you very much for attending. And I will see you all next week.